This is ChestertonRadio.com.
Section 44 of G.K. Chesterton's newspaper columns, The New Witness, 1921. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. G.K. Chesterton's newspaper columns, The New Witness, 1921, by G.K. Chesterton. At the sign of the world's end, the escape from equality. The only moral attraction of socialism is the ideal of equality, or at least the correction of inequality. There may be men who like centralization because it will involve officialism, and who like officialism because they hope to be the officials. But even when they are the officials of a socialist state, they will not be socialists. Their motive is one that could be as well answered in a servile state, and therefore most of them are now almost openly in favor of a servile state. But the motive which makes most honest men socialists is the motive of making a society in which there shall be no masters or slaves. And the moral ideal behind that motive can only be the ideal of equality, or the brotherhood of human beings upon the basis of human dignity. It may seem contradictory, but it is also correct, to say that while the Marxians must adopt this ideal, it is difficult to see why they do. Materialism and fatalism are the foundations of their creed, and these views are more easily advanced in support of incurable inequality. It may be arguable that the movements of historic humanity can best be explained as those of animals in search of food. It may be that the Crusaders marching to a howling wilderness bore a striking resemblance to a flock of sheep trotting towards a better grazing ground. It may be that a polar expedition going north is seeking a more agreeable climate, like a flock of birds going south. But nothing is more certain than that all sheep do not find equally good grazing grounds. Nothing is more certain that some birds are left behind, some birds fall and perish, and that some birds are killed by other birds. Of course, there is a distinction here. The moral ideal of equality may for some reason exist in spite of materialism, but it seems clear that their equality cannot actually come from their materialism. And I confess I am considerably puzzled about where it does come from. An Irish priest, who is a friend of mine, made the only comment on Marxian egalitarianism which seems to me to cover this point about equality. They have taken the most mystical thing in religion without the religion. But when we turn from the abstract to the concrete conception of equality, we find another difficulty. Numbers of people denounce collectivist equality as impossible. But nobody seems to notice that equality is not so much impossible for anybody as particularly impossible for collectivists. The socialist state gives all power to the government, and therefore cuts much deeper than any other government. In practice, the chasm between the governor and the governed. In every society there is the public official and the private citizen. But the number of things that the public official can do to the private citizen is increased and not diminished by the collectivist change. In short, there cannot admittedly be political equality, even if there is economic equality. Even if we have abolished aristocracy and plutocracy, there can still be bureaucracy, and perhaps a particularly bullying bureaucracy. But in truth, this is only the beginning of the practical problem and the singular paradox. I have said that even if it gives us economic equality, it must very markedly refuse us political equality. But in fact, it will not give us economic equality. There is a hitch or trick in the practical process which could have been calculated beforehand, but which in any case always appears afterwards. A sort of catch in the clockwork even of this clockwork community. Its effect is that even in the purely economic field, equality can be evaded, and its nature can be defined in a single word, familiar to all sorts of people, from the highest order of professional prize-fighters down to the lowest remnant of wandering lecturers and journalists. The secret is in the word expenses. If a man always has a motor car to take him about, only a fine shade of distinction separates him from the man who always takes his motor car about. That fine shade is for us indeed very important, but for him it may be, as in the present case, it may merely be mystical and therefore unreal. The distributist will feel the difference because of the intangible sentiment of property. But the socialist definitely explains that he does not feel or wish to feel the sentiment of property. He does not wish to own things, but only to use or enjoy them. We may therefore safely repeat that if the state permits him to use the motor car, he will probably permit himself to enjoy it. And for most people a motor car is very enjoyable. It is for them more enjoyable than walking, and if one man walks and the other man motors, we have already a scene of the straight high road of progress not startlingly dissimilar to what may be seen any day in the crooked lanes of our antiquated and aristocratic land. I take the motor merely as a model, but upon this model all the new inequality is built up. The new officials must travel swiftly, and therefore they will certainly travel smoothly. But it will be found also that everything combines to enable them also to live smoothly. They must have the handling of large sums of money, and a great deal of discretion about it, especially as in the case of politicians, the sort of discretion that can cover an indiscretion. They may be regarded as public servants, but they must be in control of a large number of other public servants, and these public servants may begin to look rather like private servants. The same will be found true of 100 details of housing or food or furniture. One of the most tolerant and open-minded men I know, a distinguished war correspondent of strong liberal sympathies, told me that the Russian Revolution had kicked some salt king or other millionaire out of his magnificent mansion, which we agreed was quite cheerful and satisfactory, but that the Bolshevist politician was living in this palace exactly as the salt king had lived in it. My friend had a specially vivid memory of the massive and superb candelabra hanging from the highly decorative roof. It seems a pity it did not fall on the salt king and smash him, but since it missed its opportunity, it might just as well fall on the socialist official before it is too late. The mention of the salt king is not unimportant here, for it distinguished this criticism from the ordinary capitalist criticism. And indeed the ordinary capitalist has no right to criticize. As he himself is not even aiming at equality, he has no claim to denounce the Bolshevists for not arriving at equality. It is illogical for the capitalists to rave and wail over Moscow because it has begun to reproduce capitalism. But it certainly has begun to reproduce capitalism. My friend, the war correspondent, is the very reverse of a lover of war. But like many men who combine peaceable opinions and personal courage, he is quite capable of the generous illogicality of being a lover of revolution. He is not naturally disposed to abuse the Bolshevists, not nearly so much as I am. But he told me very positively that a new capitalist class is rising in Russia, or in other words that the bureaucracy is capable of becoming also a plutocracy. But although the capitalists have no right to condemn capitalism, we have the right to condemn capitalism, especially when it calls itself socialism, and we have the right to say that such a compromise or amalgamation is more remote from our own ideal than ordinary capitalism itself. And this is so of necessity, for the reason with which this argument began, that the official has in any case more official power than the ordinary citizen, or even than the ordinary capitalist. The new system has already sacrificed liberty, before it thus goes on to betray equality. The logical inference would seem to be that the state which set out to establish equality would end as more unequal than those that have aimed at inequality, would end as the most unequal and unjust of all the tyrannies of mankind. So once more, by a process of elimination, we come back to the ideal of distributive democracy. So in this world men frequently try all the odd things before they think of the ordinary thing. In Russia, indeed, it has always been in some rude fashion the ordinary thing, and in some rude fashion is returning to its rights. But in England, about which I care more than for a universe of Russians, it is still counted so extraordinary that this paper appears eccentric in preaching it, and outside this paper it may never be preached again, as men passing in an express train through a great city see only in one green flash a garden or a field amid the blackness of slums and factories, so in this ephemeral publication one glimpse of the everlasting sanity will flash and fade. End of section 44.
This is Chesterton Radio, your home for podcasts of works by G.K. Chesterton, plus drama, comedy, mystery, science fiction, big bands, and much more. The soundtrack to your Chesterton day at chestertonradio.com.